everybody. My name is Nathan Wall, and I am the author of the currently top faved Bella, The Adventures of Rascal Boy and Marionette. And today I have a very big treat for you all. I have Poppy Orion joining me, and every time I tell somebody that I am interviewing Poppy Orion and having her on a Zoom call, they all get super jealous. So without further ado, let me introduce you to the star of the next 40 minutes. Poppy, go for it.
Hi, what do you want to know?
Well, tell us about yourself. Tell us what you write, how long you've been writing, and tell us about the Valmoran Chronicles and sort of how you cook that together in your noodle.
Okay. So I have written off and on throughout my life, but I never published anything until the Valmoran Chronicles. We can get into that if we talk writing process, because what I found is that serial writing actually works really well for me in terms of forcing myself to work non-sequentially, but like polish sequentially. And so it helps me to keep a cohesive narrative. So the other novels I'd written in the past sort of fell apart because I was bouncing around while writing it. And by the time I realized I had plot holes, I would have had to edit so much that I just was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And writing was never my full-time job. I've had a variety of things that I did, but the longest career I had was working in artificial intelligence and data science and corporate data strategy, and also at startups. So like just sort of bouncing around in the data space. And so that background in artificial intelligence definitely comes out later in the series of the Valmoran Chronicles, because there are a variety of different AIs of varying levels of sapience and sentience in the series. But yeah, tangents. We'll go back. So what is the Valmoran Chronicles? This is one that I've been working on for a long time. The log line for this right now is in progress, because this story, basically, it's a sci-fi mystery drama. It's really similar in feel to something like Silo or a little bit of Lost. There's some flavors of Black Mirror in there, a little bit of BSG, some Dune flavors going on, a little bit of Firefly. It's definitely been influenced by all the things I love. There's a little bit of political drama going on in this alien space that feels a little Game of Thrones, but it's hard to describe TBC.
I mentioned that a little bit in the review. I said it felt like a science fantasy space age Game of Thrones. That's probably because of the large cast of characters that you have. So definitely you follow Brandon Sanderson's be a chef, not a cook, right? And you talk about taking little pieces here and there and kind of weaving it together. How do you find working on Vella in a serial format helps assist what you want to do in building such a large scale world with so many characters you want to develop? I think when you and I were chatting before, you mentioned it was going to be about 250,000 words, which is just
over 1 million. The first book will be 250,000.
Yeah, the first book, which would just be obscene, and nobody would publish that because it would just be so long. They would just look at you and say you're crazy. Right. So
it's like a Brandon Sanderson doorstopper.
Yes. Yeah. Especially for a debut novel in series. So let's talk about Vella a little bit and how it's allowed us to, I guess, explore what it means to have a character and have them affect a plot in greater detail than it would in trying to shove them out in about 90 to 100,000 words.
Right. So Vella, like in some ways, Vella has sort of freed me from having to worry about trying to fit into a word count. But at the same time, it's working out to follow the arc of an epic novel, and about the length you would expect for a story that has 8 POV characters and 3 storylines that interweave. Like trying to compress it any more than that would have meant sacrificing depth of character. And that's not something I'm willing to do. because I love character. That's one of the biggest, like, I love character, I love mystery, I love world building. And those are like the three things that I feel like I hear from people that's what they're getting out of the Valmoran Chronicles. Those are the things that really resonate with them. So that's awesome. But yeah, writing for Vella has been a really interesting sort of like thought experiment for me, because before I really dove into publishing this, I did look into like how long of episodes people were typically publishing on Vella. The and there are some norms. There's a lot of trend towards shorter potato chip episodes on Vella, and TVC, as you probably know, does not follow that trend. And that was like an intentional decision. But I did a lot of thinking, because TVC sort of like in my brain would be like, the scenes would be somewhat reorganized because it's a television show. Like in my brain, it's a television show that has a large cast, and you really like Sense8, you're digging into these multiple plots, or like Game of Thrones, and you're seeing these reveals happen. And this whole first season takes place over the course of a week in real time. So it's got a very compressed time frame going on, and lots of things happening to lots of different characters all at once. But it's not television. It's a serial. It's not a novel, but it's going to also be a novel. And so it's been really interesting to try to think about all of the different ways that people might consume the story. Because one way they might consume it is weekly. People who are really into the story are going to open up the new episode. And so it almost needs to recap and quickly ground people in where we are, even if it's been 2 months since they saw this character. So I've learned to like really quickly ground in the scene and sort of recap and remind where we are in the story with the character. And then each of my episodes really has a self-contained emotional arc. And that's part of why they're longer episodes. Each episode tends to, especially in some of the later episodes, they have themes and motifs, and they have like a shape to them. And there's a definite feeling that is the experience I want people to take away from it. So, so they work as chapters. I'm thinking about this as I'm constructing these, thinking like, how is this going to work when it's published as a book? How are people going to experience this if they just found it and they're binging through? How are they going to experience this if they're getting it one episode, 1 week at a time? And yeah, it's kind of interesting. I'm trying to accomplish all of those things. And I also am always thinking, with a story that's a mystery like this, one of the things that's really fun is sort of, I think was it Hitchcock? I'm forgetting now. One of the greats of mystery talked about how you get to surprise people once, but suspense works in different ways if people know various pieces of information. And so one of the things in TVC that I'm always thinking about is, how are people going to experience this the first time that they read this? And how are they going to experience it when they go back and they know more? Because it's a different experience. And I actually have a couple of readers who have said they've already gone back and reread it, because it is exciting to see that, like, I'm not just like pantsing this. Like, every episode has maybe a dozen things in it that are, like, I know need to be stated and need to be in there in order to not have any Deus Ex Machinas ever in the series. So it's fun. It's challenging too.
So a couple things you touched on there. So you are eventually going to transition this into a novel. Do you anticipate it being any different in novel form versus what it is currently in Vella form?
I might consider moving a few scenes around, because when you have like so many POVs, I spend a lot of time thinking about sequencing and like this meta sequencing, because sometimes you'll have a character here who has an experience, and then another character has an experience that mirrors that. And so putting them back to back can give sort of this meta experience. But a lot of it is just sort of flip a coin, like making things up, trying to make the right artistic decision. And it's interesting when, you know, I've got like the next 24 scenes kind of sketched out in Scrivener. They each have a folder, and I'm constantly like moving them around. It's always in flux until it's like locked in as the next episode and it's canon. But I also know like how the season's going to end. I know roughly what's going to happen in season 2, season 3, season 4, season 5. And each of those seasons corresponds to a book. And it's a book. It's also in my head a television season, and it's also this serial experience. One of the things that I really love about the serial experience is it has, like, I've always had a writing style that doesn't really have fluff in it, but like there's like no fluff in TVC anymore, because I know that like these readers, like, they're showing up again and again. I have to keep hooking them. And so I want to make sure that when people show up for TVC, like, they know, like, they're going to get an experience. They're going to get like meaningful story and character development every single episode. And I think if I were writing it as a book, I might like not be as hard on myself. I might be like, oh, it's okay, like stuff happens in this scene. But now I'm like, no, it needs to have an arc. It needs to have an end. It needs to both lead into the next thing and also feel like, oh, like that was an experience, a complete experience I just got. So
Right. So you definitely are a plotter, not a pantser. Let's talk a little.
I am an intuitive plotter.
An intuitive plotter. Yes.
Yeah.
So I always liken it to going on a vacation. Everybody wants to go to Paris, France, right? And you know, when you go to Paris, France, you want to see the Eiffel Tower, you want to see the Mona Lisa. You, before it burned down, you wanted to go see Notre Dame, right? But you don't want to jam pack so much into your schedule that you don't allow for any experiencing the city, or, you know, exploring something that you didn't anticipate you would like as much, right? Growing up, I lived in Europe, and being, you know, obviously the son of American parents, when you're in Europe, when it's summertime, guess what you're doing? You're going everywhere. And because, hey, we're taking advantage of this technically free trip to Europe, we're going to jam pack everything in there, right? And my dad did the best he could, but eventually all the castles started looking the same. And there was, I remember one week it was just nonstop. We're here, we're here, we're here, we're here, right? And now I take my kids overseas. Like last year, we went to London and Edinburgh and Scotland, and I had a plan, right? I was like, all right, on day one, we're going to go see, you know.
But it's loose.
Yeah, it's loose, right? You're going to go see the Tower of London. We're probably going to go see Tower Bridge because they're right next to each other. And oh, guess what? The London Bridge experience is right around the corner, right? But everything else in between on that day, we can kind of figure out, you know, if we got more time, we're going to go see the HMS Belfast, but we're not going to rope ourselves into that, right? And so we ended up spending like 5 hours at the Tower of London because it's just it's beautiful. There's so much to see. There's so much history. My son, who was, you know, 7 at the time, he's got the map, he's going around, and I'm allowing them to explore and really soak it in. And so if I had just jam-packed everything in, right, they would not have had that opportunity. And so I tell stories in the same way. I know what I want to have happen. I know the big points, right? A couple of weeks ago, I released episode 33, and the readers were just shocked. They're like, "Oh my God!" I mean, I knew something big was going to happen, but I can't believe that happened, right? And so writing it, I knew
that's such a great experience, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. So I knew I had to do
and that's why I'm so big on that. It's I spend probably as much time pacing around and just thinking about the episode and thinking about all the next seasons and how that ties in, because, you know, if you're writing a novel, you can always go back and be like, oh yeah, there was that one scene and they need to have known this thing to have this epiphany later, so I can just jam that in. With serial writing, I've promised my readers that if it's out, it's canon. So because the story's too complicated for me to change canon on them. So once the episodes are out, it's canon, which means episodes like the last one, sometimes like the whole story gets backed up for a little bit because I realize it's incredibly pivotal. And so like true plotters, like structural plotters, I have a couple friends who are structural plotters, and they're like, I know every chapter in my book, I know all the people that are in it and the setting, and these are the things that take place. That is not me. Like, I have scenes that may or may not happen because they're there for a purpose. And I'll jot, like, they each have a folder and Scrivener, and I'll jot down notes or even like a snippet of conversation. And then like I said, I move them around. But when I actually sit down to write an episode, I've had episodes that are 2,000 words long where I wrote 10,000 words because I'm not that structural plotter. It's like, I know I'm writing this scene, it's this character, these things are going to happen, but those happy accidents you were talking about, and sort of writing my way into it. And usually the themes and motifs and the emotional arc doesn't really start to take shape until those words start getting on the page. And so I'm definitely not one of those people who's like, well, I type this many words per hour, and so this episode is going to take this long. That it's much more variable than that. It's like a gut process for me. It's like the episode is either like not done or it's done.
And you're not one of those, you put the last period on the episode and then you're immediately going to publish it, right?
No,
Yeah.
it usually goes through a couple of alpha readers who know the story really well. In particular, I usually catch all of the potential inconsistencies, and they're not really looking for grammar or anything like that. But I have a couple of really great alpha readers who know and love the story, who will actually be like, oh, hey, you have this really great motif going on. This character could have a thought like this earlier in the scene, and that will make it even better. And I'm like, oh, yes, I'm doing that. That's a great idea. And so I have a couple people who help me to just with those little ideas, or maybe like, I'm usually pretty good at picking up spots where the pacing is off, just because I read through the episode so many times as I'm almost like sculpting it as I write, because I'll read through and I'm like, that's way too much. Like, the pacing is way off. How many of these words can I throw out? But sometimes we catch pacing, sometimes we catch opportunities. And then I always run it through PWA. Because I'm terrible at catching typos. Like, I'm a really fast reader, and when I know the episode so well, I just know that like there's usually like half a dozen, no matter how many times I read it, there would be half a dozen typos that went to publication if I didn't use PWA. So Pro Writing Aid is my like second to last step.
Yep.
And I mostly just use it for grammar at this, or for a little bit of grammar check. It's usually not that, it's usually typos. And then I do a final read through on Vella. Like, I do the preview mode just to look for white space and check pacing again there. And then after it publishes, I try to be the very first person to read it again.
Get in there and
so I'm a little bit paranoid about that, but like, I really want people to just feel like they're going to come in and they're going to have this great experience with TVC. That's what we aspire to. And so it goes through a many pass process. But
tell me about your approach to character. So you've got a really big cast. Brandon Sanderson. I like Brandon Sanderson. I spent a lot of time listening to Brandon Sanderson. Things like Ellen Brock. She's an editor. Things that she has to say. Stephen King, and I kind of take their advice, right, and kind of mesh it together. The writer of The Social Network, I forget his name.
Oh, I don't remember.
But man, I always forget. It's like Andrew something. Anyway, he's got very good stuff on dialogue, right? I listened to Tyler Mowry. He's got a YouTube channel on screenwriting, things like that. And he would agree with your take on motif. He would say motif is the number one thing that drives a story. Everything else is a supporting motif, right? But character is the vehicle in which you explore the motif. And Brandon Sanderson says character is the most important part. And you've got 8 main characters. And while I might argue you have one protagonist, you do boast 8 main characters. So when you build them, what are you focusing on, right? Brandon Sanderson says you've got how smart the person is, how likable the person is, and how active the person is. And he goes, those 3 things create their likability. And I think it's kind of redundant to say a likability score creates your likability. So I would substitute sympathy for likability, right? And I would add something else. What is special about your character? Why should we want to read their story, right? And where you push the bar up on those meters determines who your main character is, who's your antagonist, right? If you have a very smart character who's not sympathetic, but they're very active, what kind of character is that? That's your
I think like there are different things. I don't use like that particularly, but like as I'm creating the characters, I'm sort of thinking about like, would I like this person? Would I be curious about this person? Are there things that this person is struggling with that make me care about this person's experience? And so the cast of TVC was very much created as an ensemble. I would agree with you that like Matai is the primary protagonist in this series. Especially, what's funny is I always knew he was a bit of a damseled protagonist, and I worried a lot about his agency because he stays pretty stuck for like half of the first season, which is always a risk. Like if you have a main character who truly does not have much agency in their life and things are happening to them, the only way you can really give them agency is by having them have agency over their internal thoughts and the way they see the world, and sort of notice their lack of agency, if that makes sense. So I kind of knew that that was going to be a risk, but there's like a definite reason that Matai is the way he is. And because I see this 7-season like epic hero arc for him, and so having him be sort of damseled and confused and feel like he has no options in his life at the beginning of the story just gives us like way more room for him to grow into this epic hero. And every hero, every POV in TVC is going to play a critical role in the mission that they have in this series. And it shouldn't really come as a shock that they're like trying to save 2 civilizations before too long when we get into this, because we're setting up this epic scale. Why would the scale be as epic as it is if they're not going to end up embroiled in something massive? But yeah, so the way that these characters came to life is I think about like what are like the ideals that each of these characters could grow to embody. What is that unique something that they represent? What is the unique perspective from their past that they have? What does that past do to mess them up so that they're terrible at trusting other people in their own particular way? Because that's a major like ongoing theme in TVC, is that we've got all of these people who don't know each other at the beginning of the story. They're like all over the universe, and they all have their own special version of damage that either might make them dependent on others or want to go off and do it on their own. But there's a lot of that damage that's going to allow them to make terrible choices early in the series. But because we've established their character, those terrible choices, you're going to be like, oh God, no, what? But it makes sense why they're doing that. And that allows a lot of opportunity for that drama and growth. But the characters, I'm sort of a method writer. When I am writing the POVs, I drop deeply into the aspect of myself that I can empathize with from their character, because that's how I grow characters. I take some part of myself, some aspect of my personality, and just turn it like up to 11, and then throw in some backstory and think about like if I were a person who was very much like Kat is a little bit avoidant. Um and but she's also very clever, like she's very smart, she's a little avoidant, and she has a bit of a neurotic inner monologue that goes on, but she's also a scientist, and so that comes out as well. And so it's like, well, okay, if I were way more avoidant than I actually am, like how would I feel, what would I be? And I just really sink deeply into that and sort of zone out into like that space and become Kat when I'm writing Kat. And so once I go through the process of sinking into it, the voice comes out pretty naturally. Some of the characters' voices take a little longer to get into. But I'm not sure if that's like, I've talked to some people who are like, oh, that's kind of weird, but that's how it works. And once I drop into it, their particular way of speaking, whether they use lots of adverbs, whether they use lots of long sentences, or really terse explanations of things, it just sort of flows out because like I've kind of identified with that character.
Right. I like one thing you said, each character kind of has their own motif, their own thing that they're pushing. So it's not just a, one point, viewpoint A versus viewpoint B and which one wins out in the end, right? What makes a much more complex, interesting story, which is something I've been trying to do with, Rascal Boy and Marionette, is you have, the protagonist's point of view is the positive of their point of view. And then another character is the negative of their point of view, right? And then you have the opposing point of view, the positive and the negative. And
yeah,
not always is the antagonist the negative of the opposite point of view. Sometimes they are the negative of your character's point of view, right?
right, exactly. Like every POV, like I don't actually follow any of the villains in TVC. Like every POV character is one of the heroes. They are gonna like, we're gonna follow them to the end and watch them succeed together.
So no major
but
death.
I've definitely set them up like Aubrey and Vi. Aubrey and Vi are each other's antagonist at the beginning because the things they value are so wildly different. It doesn't mean that either one of them is wrong. They just do not agree with basically anything.
Yeah, that'll be the so that's one thing when you have so many main characters and you treat them all as protagonists. What usually ends up happening is the main protagonist stays the protagonist, and you find out the other protagonists are just an antagonist who happens to be a good guy, right? And I did a quick search for stories with dual protagonists, and everybody brings up The Prestige, right? And I don't know if you've seen that movie, but it's
not in a long time.
It's a fantastic movie. Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman, they both push and drive the plot. They're both smart. They're both active. They're both sympathetic up until a point. Well, they both get less sympathetic as the movie goes along. But at the end, there's a clear protagonist and antagonist. There's neither one of them win, but you realize your dual protagonist story was never really a dual protagonist story. You just had an antagonist that you really liked.
But I would say TVC, I don't think TVC is going to end up being like that. I think TVC is going to be like in The Magicians or Sense8, where you have this cast of people who sometimes they want different things, and that causes like human conflict, but they're all heroes in the end. They all play a role, and they're friends. They sometimes drive each other crazy, and they sometimes don't agree on how things should be done. That's more of like the story that TVC is telling. Is TVC is, it's slightly hope punk because I was kind of tired of grimdark. Like there aren't any true like anti-heroes in TVC. Maybe the closest thing in the beginning is Aubrey. She sort of embodies a lot of like what we dislike about capitalism. But I actually don't. It's interesting because the people who identify, like, Aubrey is the most polarizing character. Lots of people don't really like her, especially in the beginning, but occasionally someone will message me and be like, I love her. I love her so much. And like they just connect with her from like the very first page because she's really unapologetic about the fact that she views herself as incredibly competent. Like, and it's a little bit shocking for a female character to be so unapologetically confident and, well, a little entitled to respect, right? Like this is sort of intentionally subversive, actually, and having Matai be more of like a submissive, reluctant heir, whereas Aubrey is fighting for her right to be the heir and believes like she's got this, she's got it under control. Like that gender swap was definitely the swap of gender role expectations there was definitely intentional.
Yeah, but it doesn't strike you as forced or pandering in any sort of way. All too often, I mean, I've read quite a few stories on Bella now, and one thing that I often find, especially with the female protagonists, is that the author is trying too hard to make them sympathetic, but in making them sympathetic, they are overly meek and it's poor, woe is me. They're not active. You don't really see how smart they are. It's just everybody else is just dominating them and
or sometimes like in urban fantasy it's like, oh, I've got my sassy protagonist, and sometimes for me like I can get behind that, but sometimes it goes almost way overboard and I'm like, she's not sassy, she's just kind of rude.
yeah,
Like there's a difference, and I tried to like kind of with Aubrey, she's definitely confident, she is confident, but she is also competent enough that if she were a man it would probably be fine for her to be as confident as she is. But like backing it up with that competence, and also she's not like rude, she doesn't go out and do stupid things because I'm right, like that was important to me. Like I think a lot of times people write strong female characters, but one of the things that I really wanted to showcase with TVC is that there are lots of different types of being strong for men.
mm-hmm.
There are lots of different varieties of strong for women. Like there is strong and very feminine, there is strong and very brusque. Like Matai is a poet and he's kind of a follower in the beginning. Callum is a bit of a misanthrope, but he's incredibly observant and he's very competent, and that sort of balances it out.
Yeah, I like Callum. He's definitely the best character early on, and whenever him and Matai finally get together, that for me is when the story really started clicking. Because when you get to see, because one of the weaker parts is you have so many POVs and they're each trying to have to pull the whole train by themselves. But whenever you get the characters, you not only get to see how the characters see themselves, but you get to see how they see the other characters, and
Yeah.
they interact, and it just becomes a much stronger story. So when Callum and Matai got together, that was pure gold. I really liked that. You had a very great line. I'll talk about that in my review.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was very good, right? And it's not something that I would have expected to come out of a science fantasy, epic. But hey, here we are, right? Your world building is by far the strongest thing you have going for you. You take Brandon Sanderson's go deep, not wide, to the extreme, and it is fantastic. So I do like that.
Thank you.
We have a few minutes left over. Is there anything else you'd like people to know about you, about TVC, and how to, I guess, get in touch with you?
Well, you can find everything at readtvc.com. there are links to the fan Discord. We've got a couple dozen people in there who kind of hang out and we talk about, it's not always talking about TVC. It's mostly just talking about all of the random stuff that we like. There's memes and all kinds of stuff. I love connecting with fans. There's a Valmoran Chronicles Facebook group. I'm not as active there as I am in Discord because I just prefer Discord. But also you can follow me on poppyorion.com. I want everyone who likes sci-fi mystery dramas with like the kind of world building that I'm trying to accomplish with TVC is the kind where it feels like it could be an alternate universe, but it's just sort of mind-blowing that there's like so much more to it, and you just sort of get swept in slowly into this like alternate world where like people are getting superpowers and Earth's economy is sort of falling apart and weird things are happening on Earth and weird things are happening in this other galaxy, and you slowly sort of find out that these things are all connected. If you really like falling into these worlds that are just incredibly complex and make you think, like I've had people say they want to make tabletop role-playing games with the TVC universe, and that would be obviously awesome. But yeah, like if sci-fi mysteries, deep characters, I try really hard to have good mental health rep, neurodivergence rep. Those things weren't actually intentional. The only thing that was intentional was making sure that I had an equal number of men and women in the cast. That was really important to me, that I wanted to have a lot of badass women, a lot of badass men, and I kind of wanted to showcase like the variety of ways that can exhibit and how that can work in an ensemble where everyone has to work together. But yeah, there's characters with PTSD. I don't think you've gotten that far into the series. I don't think you've seen Tor.
No.
But there's a four-armed ex-gladiator who has PTSD. There's a courtesan. There is a pop star. Like the cast is just, it sounds kind of wacky when I name it. Like there's, a politician and a future high priest and a business heiress and a hacker chick who does jujitsu. And it is sort of a wacky cast, but it's a lot of fun. I don't think you haven't met Zephyr yet either. He's he's sort of the sort of Han Solo of the cast. He's a smuggler who gets himself into terrible trouble because he is obsessed with luck and overly optimistic because of it. But yeah, it's a fun cast. If you like mysteries, like deep world building, I would love for you to read it because I love sharing it.
Well, thanks for coming. I appreciate it very much. Everybody, you should definitely check out the Valmoran Chronicles, available right now only on Kindle Vella. Maybe one day in the future it will be a novel, but it will be, as she said, a doorstopper at 250,000 words. That'll be quite the chunk. But
for the first season.
It's
probably going to be 1.5 million, honestly, for the whole story.
Well, don't wait that long. Check it out now. And while you're there, go ahead, please check out The Adventures of Rascal Boy and Marionette. It will put a different spin on the superhero genre. And yeah, thank you all for coming and joining. And thank you, Poppy. I look forward to talking with you again. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, Nathan.
Bye.